So it's just on. So if you read, maybe you should read the question since they don't know, or
okay,
or however you want to do it.
Okay.
I gotta run outside and do some stuff. I really do. If that's okay, I can just leave you be. And
Yeah. Okay. All right.
We'll edit it later, so we can.
All right. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, Paul wants me to tell the camera about the family, how they came to the U.S., who they were, and where they were from, and when. So I guess I have to start with one side or the other. I'll start with the Miners. Well, actually, I'll start with the Mellets because it's a shorter story. The Mellets, my mother's side, my mother's name was Alice Gertrude Mellet. She was born in 1900, and she had a bunch of sisters and brothers. Her mother and their family, the Whalens, came over in the around 1882. They came to Columbus, Ohio from Tipperary, Ireland. The family there, her mother's maiden name was English. So we have English and Whalen on that side. And then they came to the U.S., like I say, in 1882. They came to Columbus, Ohio. And they moved into, well, first they lived downtown. They lived what we call downtown now. They lived on what we call Main Street, which was then Friend Street. And they lived on the east side of the river, just east of the river of the Scioto, actually east of the canal, which they had a canal in those days that ran parallel to the river. And that was my grandmother's family. My grandfather's family came over in 1890. So they were 10 years or better than 10 years later, they came over. When he got here, he was, he was born in 71, so he was 22, 22. He was 21, that's what he was, I think 21, 22. And he and his family, they were from County Mayo, and they lost their farm that they had in a town called Swinford, Mayo, and they decided to just pack up and whatever they had left they sold, and they came over on a and I think they came on a steamer because by that time, 1890, there were no more of the old kinds of what they call coffin ships. I think my grandmother came over, her family came over on the coffin ship. Well, after they got here, he came with his father James and his mother Margaret and his sisters Delia, Anne, Mary. There was more than that, but I can't remember them all without looking at the records that I have. Anyhow, as a young man, as 21 years old, he used to walk downtown, which was not far from where he lived. They lived near Neal Avenue, their last place they lived before he got married. They first lived down near Gay and Front. They lived in that area first. So, as was accustomed in those days, on Sundays, the young men and young women would walk downtown and meet each other. That's how they met. They'd walk up and down the streets, and there was always two guys or two girls. They never were alone, usually not. And Grandpa met Grandma. Well, he didn't actually meet Grandma. He met her sister. He tipped his hat and asked the lady if he could call on her, and she said yes. So he did, and she lived on the Bottoms, which was what they referred to in those days as Shanty Irish. And he was kind of lace curtain Irish. They lived up on near Neal Avenue, which Neal Avenue area was lace curtain. So he went to call on Bridget Whalen, and when he got to the house and knocked on the door, Bridget didn't answer the door when he went to see her, meet her. My grandmother Mary did, and he said, she said, "Who are you?" And he told her his name was Stephen, and he came to call on Bridget. But he said, "Forget Bridget, who are you?" And she said, "Mary." And he said, "Well, would you care to walk out with me?" And he gave up on Bridget right away because he pretty much fell for my grandmother at that moment. And in their case, the rest is history. They married, and they had, all told, they probably had 12 to 14 children. About 4 or 5 of them died, and the rest lived. The first oldest was a boy, Johnny. Next one was Margaret, and the next one was Alice, which was my mother. And she, when her mother died in childbirth at the end of all those 13, 14 children, my mother, Aunt Margaret, who was older than her, refused to do anything around the house, and she took off and got on her own, and everything fell to my mother. She became a little teenage mother and took care of her brothers and sisters, and until she met my father, who came from Kentucky, but he was in the Ohio National Guard due to the fact that his brother, Leo Minor, lived in Akron, Ohio, and my father, whose first name was Shirley, and that what used to be a man's name, by the way, he had went from Kentucky to Akron to live with his older brother, who was 10 years older than him, and get a job and make a way for himself. There were no jobs in Kentucky at the time. So then he joined the Ohio National Guard while he was there. And then the war started, the First World War, and as you might imagine, they called him up. So he got called into the Army, and they sent him to train for what he was going to do in the war. Sent him to Camp Chase, which was in Columbus, Ohio, on the hilltop, the west side hilltop. And all the ladies, young ladies, on weekends, Saturdays and Sundays, they used to pack lunches and go out and take them out there and have picnics with the boys and see the boys that were away from home and lonely. And that's how my mother met my father. And when he went in the service and went to France in the First World War, and after he came right back to Columbus instead of going back up to Akron with his brother or down to Kentucky with his mother and father. He was pretty well smitten with my mother. Alice was a wonderful woman, as my children can tell you. She helped me with my children when I was in need of someone to help to raise them. As it turned out, I can tell you more about that, my mother and father and our family, in a minute. But first I will tell you that my father's family, his family lived in Kentucky, and there was Grandpa Jim, that was his dad, and Grandma, whose name was Lucretia Ellen, but she hated the name Lucretia, which a lot of times girls and boys hate their names, and she refused to call herself Lucretia. She called herself Ellen, her middle name. And when she got married to my grandfather, Jim Minor, whom I'm named after, she used on the marriage license L.E. Minor. She never put Lucretia. And I realized why she did that. That's par for the course for young ladies and men. Anyway, they were in Kentucky because their family came from Virginia to Kentucky. After their family first, if you go back, as far as I've got them traced clear back to 1066. And they came over from Normandy to England with the man that conquered England and became king. And they were in my people were in his army. Anyway, they started out there, and they their last name was Stokes, and the Stokeses lived in there. They had a town that they lived in where they were pretty well. They helped build the churches and did a lot of things, and they were some of them were knighted, some of them went to the Crusades, and down through history they did something. Some of them worked for kings, and some of them worked for bishops, and some of them were just regular workmen, and some of them were sailors. And we get clear down to where they came over here. One of the Stokes, Christopher Stokes, was a sea captain, and he came over to this country. And before I tell you about him, I'll tell you about the one named Cox. The Cox family, they lived not too far from where the Stokes lived, different county, but I'd say 25, 50, to tops 50 miles. And the Cox family, they came to. The first one. He was our first relation that came to this shore. He came here in sometime around 1608 or 09, and he was or 07. I can't remember, one of the two. I got it all down, but I'm trying to remember exactly. But anyway, he was William Stokes. He was 14, 15 years old when he came over, and he landed, and there he's what is referred to in the history books of Virginia as an ancient planter, which means that he got here prior to the Mayflower. And they had grants of land and so forth and so on. And they were in near Richmond, where Richmond, Virginia is right now. That's where they settled, in that area. And then they worked their way west and worked their way south, different branches of the family. Well, our branch went west and south both, and when they ended up in Lunenburg, Virginia. And that's one of my ancestors, one of the female ancestors of that clan, married a miner, and when they had about 10 or 11 children, and when he died, her name was Edith Cox, and when he died, she picked up and took the family and went to Kentucky, and that's how they got to Kentucky. And then, as you know, when my father met my mother, that's how we got to Ohio. So I could be more particular on dates and things like that, but that's basically the story. We started out in Normandy, France, and went through England, and the other part through Ireland, and met here and came through Virginia and Kentucky, and met here in Ohio, and the rest is history, as I say. Now, when it comes to, Paul wants me to tell you about our childhood, memories of the family when I was a child. Well, basically, my father, like I say, stayed here. When he came back from the service, he stayed here, married my mother. when he asked her to marry him, she was 21 and he was 21. They were both born in 19.